I was thinking Pastor Dan dressed in black with a goatee. He's a good-looking man. What most of you probably don't know is it's great for me to be back in Moose Jaw. I actually graduated from high school here, so it's good to be back in my old stomping grounds, though I've spent most of my time in Saskatchewan in Swift Current. And I know we've all heard the jokes, Swift Current, where the people are neither. And if you didn't get that, that's okay. You'd fit right in. We don't get it either. Maybe get somebody from Moose Jaw to explain it to you. One of the things I found out when I lived here is I had to learn the art of rounding up when explaining where I was from. Now, in math, you have 99 cents, you round it up to $1. Well, same with location. I went to high school in Caronport. Yay, Caronport. Go Cougars. Went to high school in Caronport, but I found as soon as I was out of southern Saskatchewan, no one had ever heard of Caronport. So when people would ask me where I'm from, I would just say, I'm from Moose Jaw. And that made sense. It was close enough. But I went down to the States, and I was in Southern California, and they asked me where I was from, and I knew they weren't going to know where Moose Jaw was. So, I just round up, where are you from? And Caronport turned into, I'm from Calgary. I'm just rounding up. By the time I get actually overseas, somehow, where are you from? Caronport turned into, I'm from New York City. I'm just rounding up here. Well, sometimes rounding up doesn't always work. Like the first time I met my brother-in-law, I asked my brother-in-law, hey, I never met him before, hey, where are you from? And he said, oh, I'm from Hudson's Bay. And I was thinking, that's a body of water. Like you're from the whole bay? Are you a fisherman? You're from a boat? And he said, no, I'm not from Hudson's Bay. I'm from Hudson's Bay, Saskatchewan. Now, I grew up here, and I know my Moose Jaws from my Moosamans. I know my Herberts. I know my Coronachs. I know my Indian Heads. I know my Balgonis. I knew quite a few towns, but I'd never heard of Hudson's Bay. And I asked him, is there a bay there? And he says, well, no. Go figure. But I said, well, where's that near? Help me out. Round up for me. And he said, I already am rounding up. I said, really? Where are you from? He says, well, I'm not actually from Hudson's Bay. I'm from Irwood. I figured, Irwood? Where is that? And he says, it's 9 miles east of Hudson's Bay. And I was thinking, hold a second. We've had the metric system in our country since 1976. 9 miles? And I was thinking, well, I'd heard this rumor, and maybe you have too, that there's some place, some highway so remote that they never got the news, and that the speed limits are still posted in miles an hour. Now, I didn't actually believe it until I talked to this guy, and, well, maybe it's true. And I said, well, what's life like in Irwood? And he said, well, I'm not actually from Irwood. I'm still rounding up. And I said, well, where are you actually from? He said, I'm from Smoking Tent Creek. Or at least a farm 4 miles north of there. My brother-in-law came from the sticks. And we'd tease him. What do you get when you have 10 people in the room from Smoking Tent Creek? 1 full set of teeth. But as much fun as I have making fun of my brother-in-law, and I do, I know a guy who's even worse. This guy worked as a ranch hand. And at least Smoking Tent Creek has a name, and it is a place on the map. This guy lived out in the sticks. And I could show you more or less where it is on the map, but there's no names, there's no landmarks. It is out in the bush. And this guy, because he took care of livestock and he would drive them from pasture to pasture, didn't actually have a house because, he had to go with the animals. So he, for the most part, he didn't even live in a camper. He lived in a tent. And he was an old guy. He's in his late 70s. And you might think, well, what, maybe, he liked being like that. He hadn't been to town literally in decades. But, maybe he liked that life. But the truth was he didn't. This wasn't really its choice. He wasn't doing this because he loved it. He was doing this just so he could eat. And while some of the other guys would go into town every once in a while, he never went with them. And there was a good reason for that, because he had some legal complications where there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest. And so he was kind of trapped in the middle of nowhere. And no prospects. He can't go into town to get a better job or anything like that. He's just stuck, late 70s, life going nowhere. He's a complete and utter nobody living nowhere. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt like a nobody? Have you ever felt that your life was dead-ended and not going anywhere? Well, this guy certainly did. Though he was a special kind of nobody. He was a has-been. See, once, years earlier, he actually lived in the city. And he was a big shot. He had lots of money. He had political connections. And he was rich. And I'm not talking own a John Deere dealership kind of rich. I'm talking owning John Deere kind of rich. Really rich. He knew the prime minister personally. Not only know the prime minister, he knew the monarch personally. So the queen wasn't somebody he had met. The queen was somebody he actually knew. He was that rich, that influential. And he wasn't like an evil rich guy. He actually believed in doing the right thing. And he believed in standing up for the poor and the oppressed and, standing up to bullies. And he tried to actually make a difference in the world. But it blew up colossally. And he ended up losing everything. And he went from rich to being a fugitive. Now, you and I, sometimes we've got regrets in our lives. Sometimes we torture ourselves with our regrets. Maybe you should have gone to school. Maybe you should have married that doctor. Maybe you should have been that doctor. This guy had titanic regrets because he knew what it was like to be a somebody, and now he was a nobody with absolutely no hope in his life. Well, one day, he was out driving livestock when he saw a brush fire. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but a brush fire is extremely dangerous. It can move very, very fast, and if the winds are unpredictable, it's tough to get away from. And so he was in a great deal of danger. However, he could see that the brush fire had just started, so it was small yet. And so he had a decision of, figuring out which way the wind was blowing and try to head upwind to get away, and hopefully it doesn't change direction. Or he could go towards the fire and see if he could possibly put it out before it got too bad. And I don't know if he was thinking, hey, I'm in my late 70s, I'm not going to be out running anything. He decided he was going to go towards that fire. And when he got up close to the fire, he saw something, he heard something or the lack of something unusual. When he got close to the fire, he couldn't actually hear the fire. Now you might think, the guy's, almost 80 years old, not hearing things is just part of the deal. But he could hear his footsteps, so he knows he hasn't suddenly gone deaf, but he doesn't actually hear the fire. And he leans into it, and he listens, and finally he hears something, but it's the last thing he expected. What he hears is this: Moses, the place you are standing is holy ground. Take off your shoes. So he took off his shoes. And that's what you do when a burning fire starts talking to you. And then the fire says, I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob. And I've heard the cries of my people in Egypt, and I am going to set them free. And I'm going to take them to a new land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, I don't know exactly how Moses felt when he heard that. His religious background, I think he's heard of God, but he grew up among the Egyptians. I'm sure he heard all the jokes. Hey, the Hebrews are so poor, they only have one God. Ha! But he's seen the massive temples the Egyptians have, and they have nothing. He's seen the colossal idols that literally weigh hundreds of tons. The Hebrews didn't even have a bobblehead of their God. And they've been in slavery for over 400 years. Where is this God of theirs? And in his own lifetime, the Egyptians committed genocide. The Egyptians went in and culled the herd and killed every single baby boy, and Moses just barely escaped. Where is God for all those babies, for all those children, all those grieving families? Maybe you've asked that question too. When we go through hard times, we go through difficulties, we read of God's promises, but where is he? Where is God? I don't know what Moses thought. But I know whatever he would have been thinking, that, God is now finally showing up. God is now acting. God is now going to do something. Then God threw him a big curveball. Because there's an unspoken question here. Yeah, you're going to save our people from slavery. How? God answers that question. Moses, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to take my people out. Me? Oh, cut Moses a little bit of slack here. What if God told you, I'm sending you to China to set Tibet free? Why would China listen to you? And Moses says, I'm a nobody. I'm a nothing. Nobody's going to listen to me. No one has ever listened to me. I'm a failure. I'm a fugitive. How in the world am I supposed to set people free from Egypt? I can't do anything. I can't even speak without stuttering. And God does something really, really unusual. Because Moses is making some really good points here. But God does something odd. You see, we've all seen Oprah. We know what's going on here. Moses is having this colossal crisis of self-confidence. He doesn't have any self-esteem. So we know the right thing to do here. It's obvious. We need to cheer Moses up. No, Moses, you're a good guy. No, Moses, you got to believe in yourself. You need to have self-confidence. You need to put your faith in yourself. You can do it, Moses. That's what we know what to do. But God doesn't do any of that. In fact, God completely ignores Moses' inadequacies. Instead, what God says is this. He says, go, for I will be with you. One of the odd things that I've discovered in Scripture, and I've read it cover to cover, is nowhere in the Bible does it tell us to have self-confidence. Nowhere. Nowhere in the Bible does it tell us to believe in ourselves or put our trust in ourselves. It's completely absent. It goes against every single Disney movie I ever saw as a child. Because we all know the plot. Bad things happen to good people, and then, they really, really believe in themselves, and then, it works out all right. That's just not there. So what does it say instead? Well, it doesn't say that we're supposed to lack confidence. The Bible says that God doesn't give us a spirit of timidity, but one of power and boldness. But it's not confidence in ourselves. We put our confidence in Him. We put our trust in God, our faith in God. That's what we do. The 23rd Psalm, probably the most famous piece of poetry in all human history, has this line in it. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because you are with me. It's a radical message, and one that Moses doesn't get. Moses continues to complain. I can't do this. I can't do it. And then God points to something in Moses' hand. He says, Moses, what's that in your hand? And Moses says, it's a stick. And God says, put your stick on the ground. And so Moses says, okay, and he goes and he puts his stick on the ground. And as soon as he lets go of it, it actually turns into a live serpent. And that's what the Bible says actually happened. Moses ran away from it. And let's be honest, if that turned into a snake right now, I would be crying like a little girl. And so would any of you. The surprising thing to me is when God says, go pick up the snake, Moses actually does. Moses is more afraid of God than he is that snake. So Moses goes and, probably very, very carefully, picks up the snake and it turns back into his staff. Now, was that a magic stick? No, it was not. It was simply an ordinary dead stick of wood. But a dead stick of wood placed into the hands of an almighty God because something powerful. Exodus chapter 4, verse 20 tells us that the staff of Moses had now become the staff of God. And Moses would take that staff and he would go to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, sure enough, I've never heard of you or your God. I'm not going to listen. Moses then proceeds to raise that staff. And we see an awesome outpouring of wrath and judgment on the Egyptians. The Nile River, the longest river on earth, Moses lifts up the staff and turns it into blood. All the Egyptian deities that they worshipped, he raises up his staff and pulls out plagues upon each of them. Even Ra, the mighty sun god, he stretches out his staff and blots out the sun. And if, as Pharaoh, your name literally means son of Ra, that means something. From this simple dead stick of wood becomes the staff of God. That 400-year-old chokehold the Egyptians had on the Hebrews was shattered and broken. And God used a dead stick of wood to set a whole nation free. And as the people left, the Egyptians changed their minds. See, the last plague that was sent to the Egyptians was the plague of death, where the shoe was put on the other foot. It was the firstborn of the Egyptians who would now die. And so the Egyptians were hurt, they were humiliated, and they were full of rage. And the children of Israel had marched into a cul-de-sac. There was water on all three sides of them. And behind them, the largest army the world had ever seen. And every single soldier in that army had lost someone. Every single soldier in that army was looking for blood and revenge. And these people, they're refugees. They don't have any armor. They don't have any swords. They don't know how to fight. They only know how to make bricks. And so the Hebrew leaders come to Moses and say, Moses, we're trapped. We're dead meat. What are you going to do? And Moses says, that's okay, I have a plan. Thank goodness. Because, we don't. What's your plan? How are we going to get out of this? And Moses says, I am going to lift up my stick. We appreciate you thinking outside of the box, Mo. But what is lifting up your stick going to do? And Moses says this, lifts up the staff, and the Red Sea parts. And this dead stick of wood now become the staff of God, not only produces judgment, but also produces a way of salvation for them. This is what happens when a dead stick of wood is placed into the hands of God. If the staff of Moses turned into the staff of God, becomes something so powerful, what happens when a man or woman becomes a man or woman of God? The question I have to ask you is, are you more than a dead stick of wood? Now, I know whenever a pastor asks a question that seems to have an obvious answer, it's a trick. Okay, this time it isn't a trick. Are you more than a dead stick of wood? The answer is, yes, I'm more than a dead stick of wood. This lady over here says, you haven't met my husband. Hey, husband aside, yes, you're more than a dead stick of wood. I believe that in our culture, our entire civilization, we have swallowed a lie. Hook, line, and sinker. And it's a lie about our very identity, who and what we are. And it's everywhere, this lie. We swim in it. And the lie is that you and I are consumers. That's what we do. We consume things. We consume food, we consume products, we consume wealth. And even in our relationships, we consume each other. We barter, we trade. I think I can do better. That's what we do. We've come to understand that the whole purpose of our lives is to consume more and more and more and more. That's what we do. We even teach our children this. Study hard. Why? So you can get a good grade. Why? So you can get a good job. Why? So you can make lots of money. Why? So you can consume more and more and more and more. That's what we believe the point of life is. Just to fulfill our appetites. However, when we do that, we've come to understand that all we are is just a collection of appetites with feet. That's all we do. Isn't there more than that? Is that really true? See, part of the problem of that, and there's lots of problems, is that's not freedom. When we're in a position where we no longer have appetites or appetites have us, we don't become free. We've been lied to. We believe that, hey, if I could have enough money or retire enough that I could do whatever I feel like, I can do whatever I want, that's freedom. Doing whatever you feel like isn't freedom. Doing whatever you feel like is slavery. Addicts do whatever they feel like, and they're not free. They're in chains. Animals are slaves to their appetites, and that's why the fish ends up on my hook and in my plate, because it does whatever it feels like. That's not the way it's supposed to be. I want you to open your minds to a possibility. A possibility that you are not the random product of pus and scum. The possibility that your life has meaning because your life has an author. That your life has purpose because you were created on purpose. It is my firm conviction that the Christian life is supposed to be one of consequence. That we are supposed to live in a way that we make a difference. Our lives are supposed to matter. They're not just about filling our bellies. They're about accomplishing something real. I believe that our lives are supposed to be nothing less than heroic. Remember when you were a little kid, you get a towel and you'd wrap it around your neck like a cape, and then maybe you'd put on your underwear on the outside of your pants and run around as a superhero? You had a better understanding of your identity then than you do now. We are men and women made in the very image of God. And even that small child knows that they're supposed to do something great. Their lives are supposed to matter. The heroic life is just being able to look to the person on your left and look at the person on your right. Are their lives better because you're in them? That's what heroism is. And if you want to be even more ambitious, there are superheroes. A superhero is not only is their lives better because you're in them, that they're better people because you're in them. There are superheroes in my life that have not only made my life better, but made me better. That I'm a better husband, I'm a better father, I'm a better friend because they are in my life. That is what we're called to. That is what we're supposed to lead. That is what our destiny is. Now, some, quite rightly, might be skeptical. We've heard a lot of rah, motivational speakers, a lot of you can do it, blah, 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 blah. We've heard all that garbage before. But we've also seen American Idol. And we know what it's like to be deluded. We've seen those people, it's my dream to be a singer. Marietta. Okay, deluded, absolutely clueless about their own limitations. They're not heroes, they're idiots. And I suspect behind each and every one of them is a lousy friend. We don't want to be that. We don't want to step out and get hurt. We don't want to make fools of ourselves. We've tried stuff before. We've crashed. We've burned. We've failed. We don't want to do it again. And you know what? On our own, that is the result. But what God says is if you put your life, your hopes, your dreams, your ambitions, your hurts, your shame, you put your life into His hands, and He promises He'll make something great. He'll make you whole. He'll make you strong. He'll make you literally a new creation. The Bible talks about how when we do that, we put our lives into His hands, that the old failed me no longer lives, but Christ lives in me. I live with His Spirit, with His strength, with His passion, and with His calling. When we put ourselves into God's hands and become that new creation, we don't become like a stranger. We become the people we were meant to be. Deep, deep inside our hearts, we know that there was something I was born to do, that we have a destiny, we have a calling. And maybe we've hit 80 years old and it's been nothing but a dead end. Maybe we don't see any future and maybe we feel just like a dead stick of wood. But what God's promise is to us is that if we put our lives into His hands, He will make something new. Now, I don't know where you are at this morning, but I'm sure some of you are sick and tired of failure. Some of you are sick and tired of being nobodies. Sick and tired of not believing that you have a future. And sick and tired of not being whole. You have an opportunity right now to change that. To put your life into the hands of a loving God. We're going to go through a prayer right now that can transform your life. I'm going to ask everybody to bow your heads and just pray after me. And if you pray this sincerely to God, nothing will be the same. Dear God, I know I've screwed up. I know my way hasn't worked out very well. And I want to put my life in your hands. I'm sorry for the things I've done. And I want you to make me new. Fill me. Use me. Send me. Now, with every eye closed and every head bowed, if you've prayed that prayer for the very first time, I don't want to embarrass anybody or call anybody out, but with every eye closed, could you just give me a little wave so I can see? Yes, I see that. Yes.